In 1830, you could get killed for reading David Walker's Appeal. This pamphlet was the most radical and controversial anti-slavery document and call to arms. Some historians consider Walker's Appeal as the start of the Abolitionist Movement. In it, he exposes the hypocrisies of American Christianity and claims of freedom. He predicted the violence that was to come and described the savage brutality and cruelty Black people had to live with every single day. Here, you can learn what made David Walker's Appeal such a profound piece of literature and its impact on history. Let no man of us budge one step, and let slaveholders come to beat us from our country. America is more our country than it is the whites. David Walker. David Walker was a free Black man, originally from the South. He was the son of a free Black woman and enslaved a man. He was born in Wilmington, North Carolina, somewhere between 1796 or 1797. Because his mother was a free woman, Walker was also free, as the law at the time allowed newborns of free Black women to live as free people. However, this freedom didn't protect him from witnessing the shame, humiliation, and brutality of slavery. When he was very young, he watched a traumatic event of a son being forced to whip his own mother until she died. For a while, he traveled around the country and eventually moved to Boston in 1826. Life for Walker was somewhat comfortable, but not perfect. He was a self-taught clothes dealer and made a living in his clothes shop on Brattle Street. Despite being a free Black man, he was still subject to discrimination. During this time, Black Americans were treated as less than human. Walker decided it was time to act. By spending time in Boston, he made important connections with Black activists. He took part in institutions that condemned discrimination in the North and slavery in the South. Walker often made contributions to the Freedom's Journal, which was the first African-American newspaper in the nation. By the end of 1828, Walker was the leading spokesperson against slavery in Boston. Since he couldn't print out the book as a white writer could, he had to use any means necessary to get the message across. In September of 1829, thanks to his trade, Walker was able to stitch copies of his pamphlet into the actual lining of clothes. Walker's shop was situated near the waterfront, which meant he would often make clothing for sailors. He used this to his advantage and sewed copies of his pamphlet into the sailors' clothing. After reaching the South, the pamphlets were then distributed across the region. To make this possible, Walker had the help of different contacts scattered across the South. The appeal sparked quite a controversy. To the slaves, his words were eye-opening and uplifting, triggering hope and a sense of pride. To the slaveholders, his words were horrifying. Whites introduced laws that banned Blacks from distributing anti-slavery literature and forbade them from learning how to read. Whites even put a $3,000 bounty on his head and $10,000 to anyone who would bring David alive. This was a lot of money, which made Walker a popular target. Everyone in his close circle worried about his safety and urged him to flee to Canada. But Walker stated that he had no intention of backing down now. If he were to lose his life, then he would have done it for the cause. In June 1830, David Walker published the third edition of his appeal. Just 2 months later, he was found dead. Official reports say he died of tuberculosis, the exact same illness that killed his daughter. But many speculate he was poisoned, especially since his body was found close to his shop. Although the actual cause of death remains a mystery, tuberculosis and other types of contagious lung diseases were highly prevalent in Boston at the time. During the late 19th century, 70% to 90% of the urban population of North America and Europe was infected with tuberculosis. Roughly 80% of those who developed active tuberculosis died because of it. Most tuberculosis patients in the 1800s would lose their lives within 5 years of getting the disease. This made the disease a perfect cover. After his death, David Walker's words and literature continued to resonate. What did David Walker write in his pamphlet that made it so controversial? David Walker's Appeal is a work designed to inspire a Black nationalist ideology. It focuses on self-liberation, self-improvement, and a call for revolt against the oppressors. At the time, there was a popular movement that strived to move free Blacks to Africa in hope of finding a better life. But Walker spoke out against this type of colonization. The greatest riches in all America have arisen from our blood and tears, and will they drive us from our property and homes, which we have earned with our blood? They must look sharp, or this very thing will bring swift destruction upon them. David Walker. At this time, Christian slaveholders used the Bible to justify slavery. Since the Bible represented the will and mind of God, slaveholding wasn't just justified, it was also moral and recognized as such in the Holy Scripture. David Walker called this ignorance. Ignorance, my brethren, is a mist, low down into the very dark and almost impenetrable abyss in which our fathers for many centuries have been plunged. David Walker. Walker deemed the white Christians, from the past to the present, to be the most hypocritical, cruel, greedy, and tyrannical people of the earth. He condemned the preachers for reinforcing slavery. For example, Christian preachers taught slaves that it was their duty to obey their masters, or the curse of the descendants of Ham would descend upon them. Even if black people were to convert to Christianity, they still wouldn't have the same rights as white families. According to Walker, a faith, like Christianity, that talks about treating other people the way you would want to be treated, and then keeping the black community enslaved, was pure hypocrisy. Basically, the whites have turned their Christian gospel into a successful instrument for subjugating other people for the sake of power, superiority, and riches. Still, Walker was a devout Christian. He claimed that God's message should be universal and taught to everyone the same way, regardless of race. Walker also wrote that he didn't find the whites alone guilty of black oppression. He also criticized blacks for feeling they had to be cowardly, servile, and treacherous. He stated ignorance was the main cause of all of this oppression. Ignorance of failing to understand that people have no right to hold others in bondage. Ignorance of being vulnerable to pro-slavery propaganda. Ignorance to being prone to servitude and self-hatred. Educated black people could remedy this problem. So, Walker saw it as his duty to educate the young and show them different possibilities. This pamphlet caused paranoia and fear among white citizens. In the early 1830s, the efforts of all the black activists, including Walker, proved to be a real problem. States fought to make stricter literacy laws. Virginia, in 1831, banned any meetings that would teach black people to read or write. The new laws also outlawed teaching slaves. The whites deemed the black community as permanently illiterate and dumb. These restrictions made the lives of free blacks and slaves even harder. But what slavers failed to predict was how literacy would become the strongest weapon in the fight to end slavery. Walker's words insinuated pride and understanding that when the future is in the hands of the younger generations, the process of freeing people from slavery would begin. Despite the numerous obstacles and consequences, enslaved people continued to learn how to read. Many enslavers might have supported this, as the enslaved often helped with sophisticated work, like managing operations. So even though slaves didn't have formal education, they could still pass on their knowledge to the youth. And it was too late. The black community was already spreading anti-slavery ideas, mostly through the written word. The more educated people were, the easier it was to raise the consciousness and critical thinking. It helped them break away from the constraints of the human mind and fight for life from a completely different angle. With the years that followed, the view of slavery drastically changed. Although it started from small efforts, like those of David Walker's appeal, the fight for freedom spread like wildfire, engulfing the nation bit by bit. Treat us then like men, and we will be your friends. And there is not a doubt in my mind, but that the whole of the past will be sunk into oblivion. David Walker. Walker strived for reconciliation, but this reconciliation couldn't happen until the whites and blacks were treated as equals, and the nation acknowledged the violence, horror, and mistreatments of the past. Although his life was short-lived, David Walker managed to get unfathomable attention and helped instill confidence and pride in the black community. His efforts and frequent contributions earned him a great reputation for his kindness and generosity within Boston's black community.